Greetings and welcome to another edition of Seeing Unseen Angels. Hello, my name is Derek Williams, and I'm the Associate Minister for the Great Oaks Church of Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. Today we're going to continue our study of the occupation of angels because we're learning about what on earth are angels up to. Last week we learned that angels are involved in government, and it was a difficult lesson. Well, this week will be easier. In fact, we're going to have some fun with this one. In this lesson, we're going to learn about angels and dating, as well as angels and danger. Have you ever gone through one of these professional online dating services? Or do you know anyone who's met their mate that way? Well, there's absolutely nothing sinful about meeting a mate or getting a date online. Two members of our congregation met and then later married and have remained happily married until this day. And by the way, did you know that God used an angel once to arrange a marriage? So obviously there's nothing sinful about arranging a marriage. There's a story in the Bible where an angel had the ministry of establishing a relationship. Do you think it's possible that angels are arranging marriages even now? Is it possible that you and your spouse were touched by an angel and brought together by the unseen hand of God? Well, I've always been a fan of ancient Greek and Roman mythology. When you think of an angel and romance, which fictional character frequently comes to mind? Well, of course, we think of Cupid. Let me tell you a little bit about this ancient god of love. Cupid was the ancient Roman god of love in all its varieties, the counterpart of the Greek god Eros. And according to myth, Cupid was the son of Mercury, the winged messenger of the gods, and Venus, the goddess of love. Well, how is Cupid usually depicted in paintings? Or Britannica said he often appeared as a winged infant carrying a bow and a quiver of arrows whose wounds inspired love or passion in its every victim. He was sometimes portrayed wearing armor like that of Mars, the god of war. Now, I think that's interesting that the Roman god of romance and relationships would be depicted wearing armor for war. Do you see any irony in that picture? Or was that some type of prediction of what would be needed after a man and woman were married? Armor for war. Well, perhaps the armor was just simply to suggest the invincibility of love. And although some literature portrayed Cupid as callous and careless, he was generally viewed as a kind and beneficent on account of the happiness he imparted to couples. And at the worst, he was considered mischievous in his matchmaking, the mischief often directed by his mother, Venus. Now, in one tale, her machinations backfired when she, Venus, used Cupid in revenge on the mortal Psyche, only to have Cupid fall in love and succeed in making Psyche his immortal wife. So parents and angels have always been involved in stirring the pot of romance in their children. Now, in this lesson, we're going to see that as well. There was a parent who wanted a wife for his son and an angel who wanted to help arrange the marriage. Well, the parent was Abraham, and his servant was assisted by an angel to carry out his master's wishes of finding a wife for Isaac. Now, let's examine the following principles. Angels are establishing relationships. When Abraham was old and near death, he sent his servant on a long trip to get a wife for his son Isaac. The man who was the father of the nation of Israel had been told by God to leave his homeland in Haran to go to Canaan. And Abraham obeyed, and he went, not knowing where he was going. Well, what were the people like who lived in Canaan? Well, the land was full of evil citizens and were eventually annihilated by Israel when Joshua invaded and took the land due to Canaanite immorality. When Abraham got old, he wanted Isaac to have a wife, but he did not want the son of promise to marry a local Canaanite girl. Why? Well, the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, evil companions corrupt good morals. So Abraham did not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite wife, nor did the old man want his son to return to his former homeland. Why? Because God had given Abraham and his descendants the land of Canaan, and the Lord wanted them to remain in that region. Therefore, the father of the faithful conjured a plan to save his son from Canaanite corruption and to keep him from returning to Haran, where his family lived. Now, let's read our text to see how this angelic dating service intervened in the life of Abraham and his son, Isaac. Genesis chapter 24, beginning verse 1 says this: Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife from my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." Well, the servant asked him, "Well, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household in my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land.' Now get this, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there." Now, who promised Abraham that an angel would assist his servant in finding a wife for Isaac? Well, God did. So it's clear to me that God was going to use an angelic dating service to bring a wife for Isaac back from Haran, Abraham's old homeland, all the way to Canaan, his new homeland. Well, later in this same chapter, we will see the servant found the perfect woman for Isaac by the hand of God, and he used an unseen angel to accomplish the mission. Now, before he left Haran, Abraham's servant had asked some questions, as I think most of us would in verse 5. He wanted to know the protocol in case of failure to get the wife. What if she didn't want to come back with the servant? He wanted to know, should he return and take Isaac back to Haran? We'll look now at verse 8, where Abraham answered his servant's questions. "If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore on oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. And he set out from Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Well, here we're seeing the occasion where the servant went back to Haran to find the wife for Isaac. How did the Lord, through the agency of an angel, show the servant which woman was the right one for Isaac? Well, we pick up reading now in verse 12. Then he prayed, that is, the servant prayed, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." But before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. And she went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. Well, the servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. And after she'd given him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels too," until they had finished drinking. Do you see how this relationship between Isaac and his bride-to-be was prearranged? How do you think God enlightened the servant to know what to pray, and the prospective bride to know what to say to identify Rebekah as the right wife for Isaac? Well, we see in verse 12 where it says, "Then he prayed." See, one of the principles we learned in this class is that angels are involved in our prayers. We saw it in Revelation chapter 8, verses 3 through 5. That's where the angel received our prayers and was sending them back to earth with great power. And in our last lesson, we saw an example where Daniel prayed and an angel came in response in Daniel chapter 10, verse 12. And here Abraham's servant prayed, and God's will was revealed perfectly in Genesis chapter 24. See, I think the angel was involved because God himself said this. And that is how he was going to arrange a wife for Isaac there in Genesis chapter 24, verse 7. Well, how did the angel do it? Well, perhaps the angel whispered in the servant's ear exactly what God wanted said. And then he did the same in the ear of Rebekah, who repeated the servant's prayer verbatim. Now that's speculation. We don't know how it happened because the Bible did not reveal it. But what do you think the chances were that Isaac and Rebekah would meet, marry, and live happily ever after the angelic arranged marriage? Well, I think it was 100% because God said that was going to happen. Now, we could step back and ask, should we base a belief that angels arrange marriages on just this one verse in Genesis chapter 24, verse 7? What I do. God sees ahead as he did for Isaac and Rebekah, and he used an angel to arrange a marriage that lasted a lifetime. In fact, their descendants became known as the children of Israel. And they would become a great nation through whom God would send his son into the world to save us from sin. Well, how did it all get started? Through an angelic dating service. And why? Because God could see into the future and he knew what we all needed. There was a student who finished up his examinations just before the Christmas holidays, and he had not really studied. And the professor asked an unusually hard question. The student didn't have the foggiest notion of what the right answer was. So he thought perhaps that he could just get by because of the spirit of the holiday season. This is what he wrote on his examination paper. He said, "Only God knows the answer to this question. Merry Christmas, Professor." Well, the professor looked at it and he wrote this on the paper before he returned it to the student. The note said, "God gets 100, you get a 0. Happy New Year." You see, God knows some things that we don't know, but we don't have to get a 0 because we don't see his unseen angels arranging our future. But I think God is still using angels to arrange dates today. Now, it's time for some true confession, so brace yourself. When my wife and I started dating in college, she was engaged to another man. Now, don't try to convince me that angels aren't involved in arranging relationships. See, the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, "Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?" When I was getting ready to marry Cherry, she brought me home with her to meet her parents. And after dinner, her mother told her father to find out more about me. And her dad invited me to sit down and talk about the impending marriage. And he asked me, "So, Derek, What are your plans? I said, I'm a Bible scholar. He said, a Bible scholar, huh? Well, that's admirable. But what will you do to provide a nice house for my daughter as she's accustomed? I said, I will study and God will provide for us. And then he asked, and how will you buy her a beautiful engagement ring as she deserves? I said, well, I will concentrate on my studies and God will provide for us. Father said, and children, how will you support my future grandchildren? I said, don't worry, sir. God will provide. Well, the interrogation continued, and each time my answer would be, God will provide. But later, Cherry's mother asked her dad in private, well, how'd it go, honey? Well, her father said, well, Derek has no job, no plans, but the good news is he thinks I'm God. Well, you understand that's just a preacher's parable, right? But the point is, parents are intensely concerned about who their children will marry. A parent prays for good in-laws and fears the prospect of their children getting hooked up with outlaws and Canaanites. And that was exactly the concern of Abraham for Isaac. Is finding the right person to marry an important service angels can provide for us? Well, I believe they can. But someone could say, well, dating is too frivolous for angels to get involved, and maybe that's true. However, it wasn't when Isaac needed a wife, and he was no more precious to God than you and your family are. When your children get ready to choose a mate, I believe you can boldly request the help of angels to weed out Satan's rejects. Abraham wanted his servant to go back to his homeland to get a wife rather than marrying the heathen women of the surrounding Canaan countryside, and one of God's angels helped in the process. God said so in Genesis chapter 24, verse 7. Now, maybe what our kids need today is more providential angelic assistance in this most crucial decision. So angels have the ministry of establishing relationships. That's another one of the occupations of angels. Well, next, let's examine that angels are establishing refuge. Now, we have studied many verses in previous lessons that reveal the angels' protection of God's people. For instance, we saw in Psalm chapter 34, verse 7, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Well, in this text we're going to examine in Psalm chapter 91, we're going to see how God's angels provide a place of refuge for those who fall under Satan's attack. Psalm 91, beginning in verse 1, it says, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you make the Most High your dwelling, even the Lord, who is my refuge, and then no harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Now, in verse 9, it speaks of how God is our refuge in time of trouble. And then it says in verse 10, no harm will befall you and no disaster will come near you. And in verses 11 and 12, it says, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Then they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Well, these verses are God's telling us that the angels are responsible for providing a place of refuge in your time of trouble. Now, do you truly believe that God is using his angels for your providential care? Well, I do. One preacher wrote these words concerning God's providence. He said, I recall a significant incident at one of the first churches I served nearly 30 years ago. One of our older, highly respected, and dearly loved members had been diagnosed with a massive lung tumor. Since he was scheduled for surgery on Thursday morning, our little church gathered early on Wednesday evening for a concentrated prayer time in which we begged God to spare this good man's life. When the doctors left the operating room the next morning, they announced to the family that apparently some mistake had been made. No tumor was found in his lung. The thing that amazes me the most about this is how little we celebrated the incident after the fact. Oh, we were thankful, kind of, sort of, yet it's as if we were afraid to say much for fear that to honor God too much in such a situation might raise questions we could not answer. Questions like, well, why would God heal him and not this other fellow? And so we blushed, we stammered, we stuttered. We were glad a mistake had been made, and almost apologetically, we said a slight thanks that God had answered our prayer. I think the only mistake made during this process was our failure to give God all the praise, honor, and glory he deserves for each powerful activity in our lives. Now, was that an act of an angel working through the providence of God to be a place of refuge in time of trouble? I believe it was. Some of you have experienced God's angelic involvement in this world. I've shared a story with you in this class from a former member of this church who is absolutely convinced that angels establish refuge for them during a time of a major crisis. And this person believes the words of Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, that are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? And for them, the answer is absolutely. However, what if the angels don't stop your cancer, your car accident, your family emergency? Does that disprove the idea that angels are working providentially in this world? No. Just because God doesn't stop some tragedy in your life, it does not mean that the angels are asleep on the job. Friend, do you remember what Jesus said when Peter pulled out the sword to cut off the head of the man who came to arrest the Lord? Jesus spoke to Peter and said in Matthew 26, verse 53, Peter, do you not think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put all at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? A legion was 6,000 soldiers, and Jesus had 72,000 sword-wielding angels ready to stop his arrest, but they were not allowed to intervene. See, sometimes God allows his angels to take action for us, and at other times, the Lord tells the angels to stay put, as he did when his own son was arrested in the garden. Why? Well, we trust this verse, Romans 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. Whether angels assist us or whether God makes them stand pat, we know that he's working for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. Remember, Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12 say this, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all of your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. It's clear to me that angels are establishing refuge for us. Now, what have we learned? First, I believe God's angels establish relationships, as we saw with Isaac and Rebekah. And second, I believe God's angels establish refuge in time of trouble, as we saw in Psalm 91. And as we close, let me share one more story from a member of this church who believes an angel came to the rescue to establish refuge in a time of trouble. This is the occupation of angels. This member wrote, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that angels are among us, seen and unseen. I know this because God blessed me with the presence of an angel several years ago. Many events and experiences in my life have faded from my memory, but this one, no. It's a picture in my mind and a feeling in my soul that will never go away. My daughter and I were along for the ride to the store with a dear friend of mine. She was driving, and my little daughter, about 7 at the time, was in the back seat on the driver's side. I was in the front passenger seat. As we went through an intersection, the oncoming car turned in front of us. My friend swerved to avoid as much as possible, but we hit hard on the right side, my side. She and my daughter were buckled up and were okay. We had just left the bank, and I had not yet buckled up, and so I hit the windshield. We were in the middle of the intersection with traffic going all around us in all directions. When my friend got out to talk to the other driver that she had hit, I was a little rattled, but I knew I had to get my daughter out of the car and to the parking lot across the street where it was safe. However, my door would not open. I got out through the driver's door and got my daughter out of the back seat. The only thing on my mind was getting her out of the traffic to a safe place. I had her hand, and as I turned across 2 lanes of traffic to the other side, I was stopped. A man dressed from head to toe in motorcycle gear was standing in front of me. He stopped me and said, I had to wait. Well, I remember the panic and saying that I had to get my daughter out of the street. He put his hands up to stop me and said, traffic is coming and you can't go yet. He stood with us, and in just a few seconds he said, it's safe now. The voice was calm and reassuring. Nothing else was said. We crossed the street to the parking lot, and I immediately turned to thank this man for helping us, but he was not there. I asked the people standing there where the man on the motorcycle went. I had to thank him. They asked, well, what was I talking about? I said, the man that had helped me across the street dressed in motorcycle gear. The man on the motorcycle. They all said there was no man and there was no motorcycle. My daughter didn't see the motorcycle man that put his hands up to help us. There was a certain peace, something in my heart and soul knew exactly what had occurred. Now, this is a very personal story, and I don't share it with many, but there's no doubt that God blessed us that day with one of his seen angels. When I get to heaven, I hope to meet my angel for a proper thank you. What did I tell you earlier? Well, I told you that God's angels establish refuge in our time of trouble. Again, Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12 say this, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to those who will inherit salvation? Yes, they are. Does the angel of the Lord encamp around those who fear him and he deliver them? Yes, he does. You see, that's just part of the benefit that we have from the occupation of angels. Next week, I hope you'll join us again as we learn about the order of angels and learn about the different types of these very special beings. I hope you'll join us again then. Thank you for being here today.